You are listening to MSP 1337. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, and I'd like to thank you for joining us today. First and foremost, I'd like to thank our sponsor, MSP-Ignite. MSP-Ignite offers a peer group experience that is unique to managed service providers in the technology industry. If you are serious about implementing a model for success through sharing and collaboration of best practices, this is the best way to do it. Head on over to msp-ignite.com to get more information. All right, on to the show. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of MSP 1337. I'm joined again this week by Charles Love of ShowTech Solutions. Welcome, Charles.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate being here.
Hey, topic for this week is kind of coming on the coattails of last week's conversation where we focused on risky clients. And the premise was really about knowing when to let a client go or like know where the line in the sand is because you've tried everything you can and it's just not working. And it made me think about the conversations that you and I have had over the years, going all the way back to when you and I worked together. How do we evaluate when we onboard a new client if that score measures up to even taking on the risk in the first place? So this week, it's all about Scorecard, the scorecard of our client or prospective client, and knowing the answers. And maybe, and Charles, correct me if I'm wrong, as we go through this conversation, is it useful to apply this also to existing clients, like to do a periodic, like how do they score today versus when we onboarded them?
Absolutely. So we tend to do it kind of both. So we will take a vague scorecard, so to speak, when we first talk to a customer, because 9 times out of 10, the answers are always wrong.
Sure.
Because it's what they believe to be true. Of course, they have a super duper firewall. And then when you go in the room, it's the router that the ISP gave them. Right.
We used to call them modems. I mean, we've gotten so sophisticated over the years that we now use bigger words.
Exactly. Things like that. And so once the customer gets through the sales cycle, and now it's really our responsibility. Now I have a much more in depth where it's going to be a trust, but verify.
Right.
You say you do X. Now let's see if you actually do.
Well, and saying and doing might not even be the actual issue, right? So like I went through this with another client. I'm literally in the room looking at the firewall and I'm like, wow, that's a really nice new firewall. And then it didn't have any of the security services turned on, even though they were paid for. They just hadn't gotten that far yet in setting up the firewall. I'm thinking like, well, like what's the timeline that's considered acceptable for setting up a firewall? Like a year, 1 day? Yeah. Like usually when you put a firewall in, project isn't done with putting the firewall in until those things are turned on.
Yeah. And, things like, are you renewing it every year? Right. Certain vendors have that fee and they're like, no, we haven't paid anything in 7 years. Okay.
Or it's a new box, but it comes preloaded with a default installer that might be 7, 8 years old. And until it checks into the internet with the new license key, it doesn't actually load the new image.
Absolutely. Yeah, happens all the time.
That one just blew my mind. I'm like, why would a vendor even send a box? It's like, well, they're ensuring that the box is useless until you pay for the services.
Yeah, exactly. It's a fancy ISP router or modem, whatever you want to call it.
It's a NAT device.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, if you like, I can kind of go through, the sales cycle stuff. Nobody wants to hear that. I'm sure they do. I don't. But I can kind of walk you through.
Look, we're not in sales.
Yeah, exactly. But I can kind of walk you through the things that I look for, and then we can kind of talk about that if that sounds good.
Yeah. So let's set the stage a little bit. So you have an opportunity. Your sales person, or maybe you are the salesperson, depending on who's listening, how big your MSP is. But you've gotten past an initial conversation. A business that's looking for services that you provide, and we're kind of past that whole like. What do they have in the environment? You've kind of done a precursory look. Now it's like we're getting down to brass tacks. It's like now you've brought in an engineer to really, like you said, trust but verify that what they say they have and how many employees they have, those kind of things are actually true.
Yeah, for sure.
So here we are. Now we're in it. what do you look at to say, and obviously everybody's scorecard is feasibly going to be different, but as we were talking about earlier, there are some elements to your scorecard that are deal breakers that are probably or should be deal breakers for anybody that's listening to this.
For sure. Or it's a hard conversation to be having, right?
Right.
So not every customer allows us to do these go no go meetings. Most are okay with it, but a lot of times they don't even know their passwords, right? So
Sure.
Sometimes it has to wait until after, but if I can validate the stuff beforehand, it just makes me happy.
Well, right, because you don't want to onboard someone indefinitely.
For sure. And I've gotten these waivers made up. Like, all right, so you have a server, you don't have a BCDR, right? Here's a waiver I need you to sign holding me liable. And the one thing you don't want to happen is you have a brand new relationship with a brand new customer. Hey, here's 15 waivers I need you to sign, holding me non-liable for anything that possibly goes wrong.
You're indemnifying me from everything. I haven't even walked through your front door yet.
Yeah, and for somebody who's so far like south on the curve of where they should be, that's kind of hard to do. If it's a customer and they go, we don't like two-factor. Cool. Here's a piece of paper saying that you knowingly are not going two-factor, right? That's different versus here's 15 things I need you to do.
So I don't want to derail your scorecard, but for a minute, humor me. I hear this a lot. You're not the first person to say that, like clients that are still refusing 2FA. And I'll be honest, I realize that despite what we can say on the flip side of like, well, it's free and it's just a toggle switch, it can have some serious ramifications to it if the rollout isn't well planned out. And so, but that being said, are we at a point where it's acceptable if is the means and the mechanism to deploy 2FA multi-factor of any kind, that it is a deal breaker?
I would love to say yes. But it's a no.
I mean, I've got vendors that are forcing 2FA on their sites. Our banks now force 2FA on customers, on consumers. How do we continue down this path? I mean, I would like to say if MSPs collectively as a whole said deal breaker, how many MSPs are going to get tell the client the same thing before the client's like, wow, we can't get managed services from any MSP unless we're willing to turn this on.
It could be. A lot of times it's a conversation I try to handle before the sales cycle is over.
Sure.
Like it's coming, right? I don't care what you think. Microsoft, I don't know, a year or so ago forced it on for global admins.
Right.
Man, it is coming where they're going to force it on for users. And worst case, it's going to be kind of like Google, where if you don't have two-factor turned on, there's still an element of two-factor.
Yeah.
You don't even know it, right?
Well,
it's that.
Yeah, put in your phone number, PIN number, whatever. There's something that happens. Yeah.
It at least with Google, like even the free stuff, it'll send you an email saying, "Hey, was this you?" Just making sure it was you, right?
Yep.
And even that little thing would be awesome for a customer to, "Hey, did you just log in from Siberia, from Tampa, Florida?"
As a matter of fact, I did. I got this new VPN. It was free.
Yeah.
It's an extension on my browser. I love it. What do you mean it's calling in from Siberia?
Yeah. So those kind of things, like, man, if they could just default that on for everybody, I think it would help. But it's, we deal a lot with nonprofits, and they just don't want to put, for the part-timers who are there for 2 hours a day, they don't want them to have two-factor on their phones. So I joke with them. I go, I got you. And these little magic keys, right?
Yeah, the YubiKey.
So the YubiKeys are awesome, right? Yep. There's two models. There's the old one, and then I have the new tiny one that goes on my key ring. And so now the argument is over.
Yeah, I have mine too.
Yeah.
Let's see there it goes.
Yeah. So the argument is over. All right, cool. You don't want it on your phone. All right. So you're gonna have to pull this thing out, plug it in, touch it,
Yeah.
and have a pin. So 4 things, or just say, yes, that's me on my phone. So if you want to move from pushing one button to doing 4 actions,
So
$50 solves it.
so along those same lines, do you remember the RSA like what you showed it was on a key ring, right? Like that
Yep.
had the numbers. Like, can we get those back, please? Because that solves both problems, right? That's still using the number.
Yeah.
But
I actually have one for one of my games. It's a Vasco token.
Nice.
Yeah, but it's still just, it works like a champ, and that battery's been running for 10 years.
I actually
right?
just found one the other day that I had gotten from PayPal before VeriSign acquired it, and it sadly doesn't work anymore, but it's probably been 12 years. And I think you can pop them open and put a new battery in them.
Probably. But I mean, it's a lot of times we sound like the paranoid schizophrenic, right?
Right.
Like there's, oh my God, somebody's going to come in and hack you. And it's like, no. They're not doing it for that. Sure, there's crypto and all that stuff. They probably just want to use you to be an element to send somewhere else. So once you stop sounding like the aliens guy writing on the board,
right,
and be like, look, we just want to secure you, especially now with all of our customers. Like, we use OneDrive super heavily, and I'm like, you do realize if your password is compromised, what you call hacking, which means you gave it away, or they figured it out, they have full access to your desktop and pictures, right? And boy, if you're using Teams, they have access to all that too. And that's when they go, oh, so I can stop that? Yes, you can. Well, it could still be worked around, but it's a lot easier than not having it.
Well, that's like this. We can get back to the scorecard, but I'll use this as an example of a scorecard mechanism that I do in my world, which you may do as well. Hey, we're 365, and so you guys would become our new partner, and it's like, well, before we touch your 365 and start helping you manage that, I would like to look at it, right? Like, I want to just like, can I look over your shoulder at what you have in there? And I just did this the other day, and it's like, the score was 55. Did you know that 55 is a default score when Microsoft 365 gets the switch turned on and you configure the domain? And as long as you put the proper MX records in for DKIM, you will get a score of 55 for compliance.
It's funny.
So that still leaves 612 controls to address. And that's not even being compliant to a framework. That's just things like TLS 1.0 and 1.1 being disabled. And I literally, while talking to the client, they're like, yeah, but that's already been disabled by Microsoft, so it doesn't matter. And I'm like, actually, because of COVID, Microsoft walked that back. So unless you're a GCC or GCC high, 1.0 and 1.1 are still there. And then I got, but nobody's using it. I'm like, that's funny. There's this cool little report you can click on inside of 365 to tell you who is using it.
Yeah.
Oh, look, you have somebody using it. They were mortified. And here we're walking. What we're talking about right now is the basics of security weren't even looked at because the assumption was we have 365 from Microsoft. You're telling me that when I turn that on, Microsoft doesn't turn on at least basic security controls? No.
Yeah.
They're changing that model, but I mean, they've been doing this because they're dragging their customers kicking and screaming. COVID was the reason to still stay in 1.0 and 1.1. Why? I have no idea. That makes no logical sense to me. Anyways, I digress. The focus here is scorecard. For me, if that would have been an onboard for my client, I would have probably said this is a potential deal breaker. Too much shadow IT.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, like, I love the media, but everyone's using Edge, right? Because we're recommending people use Edge now, and they have all these little windows, right? And for 2 weeks, I got calls from people. Oh my God, are our PCs up to date? I'm like, where's this coming from? Oh, the homepage on Edge says I should shut my computer down if I don't have any updates. I need to update it right now, so I need to make sure that we're up to date. And I kind of joked with a couple people, but where's that passion for securing your accounts, right? Where's the phone call? Hey, do we have that two-factor thing? Where's that call?
Right.
Right? It never happens. It's an update only, and I'm not downplaying it, but if there's a very specific scenario to your PC, they can do bad things versus anybody can just log in with a script.
Well, I think
Yeah.
you raised the point though of who should dictate to the risky client. It's like deja vu from last week's episode. But when a client is coming to me and they're demanding the things that we as MSPs are responsible for from a like oversight, like we should be bringing this conversation to the client, right? Or at least
For sure.
leading the conversation. It goes back to the same problem we have with politics and all kinds of other things where you get language like fake news and, where's the source that's defining that this is actually happening. This is the MSN default homepage that is literally being loaded on every single Windows machine that runs the Edge browser, right? So as an MSP, not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but do you have some obligations as an MSP to say by default when we impose or put Edge in as your primary browser that we're removing some of those artifacts so that they could choose to change them to whatever it is that they want it to be, but
For
at
sure.
least by default, maybe it starts with the Google search engine or something else that's removing that temptation to then dictate terms to the MSP about what is or isn't important.
Well, and as we get better with Intune and all that stuff, one of my tasks is to figure out how to put our blog articles in those little
Right.
stuff our news into their page.
I mean, if you think about it, you should be. I mean, I think we used to do the mouse pads, right? Like that's got our company name on it and the phone number. Like that's dumb. Who's looking at their mouse when they're using the computer? Nobody. They just put their hand on it. But looking at the screen every time they open a browser or a new tab, whoa, wait a second. There's a notification from Big Sur. No, from Showtech. Sorry, that was really bad. I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to go and cut that out. Anyways, back to the scorecard.
So let's talk about it a bit. Customer. So we have brand new customer, right? And we have this honeymoon phase. We're getting to know them. They're getting to know us. I have my article that says here's all the things we need to address.
Right.
And I have a handful of things that I want to vet. And the big thing here is if I have way more no's than yeses, then I have to have a hard conversation. Is this customer worth keeping?
Give me an example of what you consider a no, a no that's significant. Like you immediately took a note that was a no on a specific question.
Everybody's an admin.
Okay.
Right. So, we're constantly running into that where, why did the terminal server get shut off again? Oh, it happens all the time. And then you go and look, and everybody's a domain admin because the previous MSP couldn't spend 20 minutes troubleshooting some app, and their fix was just make everybody an admin. And then they shut down their computer, and next thing you know, the server's down.
So let me ask you a question on that particular note. So I think about the admin piece, and if we rewind a little bit, you install Edge, or Edge is the primary browser. Edge loads the MSN homepage. If I think about setting up a Windows machine, if as an MSP, it's not being set up by the MSP first, this is pre coming into this client. They went to Best Buy and bought a Windows machine and they set it up. Their user profile probably is default admin.
Yeah, general user or Office PC or something like that. So we have no idea who these people are.
Sure.
Like I just see general computer names and general usernames. That just drives me crazy. So like there are the scorecard things, and then there's the man, I really wish we can do this. Hopefully if it's they're using Best Buy machines, hopefully we're using something like Azure AD or some other technology, Active Directory, there's some other tools that we leverage. But
Right.
let me highlight a couple here
Okay.
for you.
Yeah.
Um, it's some of these are not deal breakers, but
By the way,
boy, do they help.
listeners, this is the time to take notes and go.
Uh, so the things we're looking for, and the bulk of what we do is focused around 365.
Sure.
Do we have a system in place, either by we're bringing it in or they currently have it, to do things like change management and audit trail of 365 and or Active Directory, right? So that's one question. I have tools that can do that, but do we have anything that's recording what's happening?
You mean like using compliance managers,
Yes.
built-in change management? Yeah, got it.
And it could be things like, Lion Guard, or it can be just a compliance manager.
It
Doesn't
could
matter.
be a spreadsheet. The reality is, are they doing something?
Well, can I go back in time and be like, why is Becky an admin? Oh, because Chris made Becky an admin.
Yep.
Right. And I go ask Chris, why did you do this? Right. Or it opens a ticket when it sees that kind of situation.
Because she bought a laptop from Best Buy.
Yeah. And they didn't know how to fix, whatever program.
Yeah.
The couple of other things that we like to put in. I'm a huge fan of the think before you click banners for internal mail. Right. I want to see if they have that, because with phishing attempts, especially for a brand new customer, I can't just throw every ShowTech software at them at once. It's too much change.
Right.
Sometimes I phase it in, but that think before you click banner, I can't tell you how many times people have, even today, like we had one a couple weeks ago, went to Best Buy or Walmart to buy gift cards. It's like, what did the previous MSP teach you guys?
Well, that everybody is a winner.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. So after think before you click, and that one's, I get worried when the customer says, hey, can you move it to the bottom?
Of the email. So this is in 365 putting a banner so that when they open their email at the top, the first thing they see is think before you click.
Correct. And I love having this conversation because and I'll color it as best I can, to the customer. And they go, well, we don't want it at the top, we want it at the bottom. So you mean where nobody will see it, right? You can move it to the bottom. I just tell them you can't. Sorry, that doesn't work that way. And they're like, well, and this is my favorite thing. When we're on the cell phone, the preview is showing the banner. Mm-hmm. Yes. And at the red light, when you're not supposed to be on your phone checking email, that's when you need it the most, right? That's when somebody's going to phish and get it.
The 2-second glimpse. And it's funny. I thought I was a victim of a phishing campaign once, and it wasn't. But because I didn't even hesitate, I'm like, oh, Beats headphones? Yes.
Yes.
I did get a pair of Beats headphones. It was totally legit. But I mean, I kid you not, for like 2 weeks, I was sweating like, what if I got phished? Then I actually had the meeting with the company, and I was like, whew. But live and learn, man. The second click could have easily been not a pair of Beats headphones.
Oh, for sure. And with that comes phish testing, right? So we use a service where every month I send out a phish test to everybody, and I send out user training. So it's a 12-month course. I have to only remember to fix it every year.
Yeah.
Where they're 5-minute classes, and they can print out a little certificate that says I did a thing. Right. So my question back to them is, when have you trained your employees? And when that's a never, that's a big red light for me, because that means I'm going to be getting panic calls at all hours of the day and night because they did a stupid, right? Not a stupid. They fell for a phishing trap. They gave away their password, things like that. So these are all little things I look for. I'm also looking to see if they have any kind of current cyber liability.
Right.
And I want to see how the MSP answered the questions before. We recently had a customer who sent me their form, say, hey, it's a new year, they need to see the new form. And 90% of my answers were no. And they're like, Charles, I'm sorry, you don't know what you're talking about. Our previous IT guy has been doing these for the last, 7 to 10 years.
Forever.
And they've always, and last couple of years, they've always been yes. I said, all right, well, let's look at them. And just two factors, the easiest one to explain. And it says, every time you're remote or on a new machine, and that prompts two factor. And the previous IT guy said yes. I said, all right, so let's open up a private browser. Like, let's do it. And then they do it, and it doesn't prompt them. I'm like, see, that's a no. And they're like, oh my God, I can't believe that. So it's what they believe to be true isn't necessarily always the case.
And even if it was true, there's so many questions on those forms that they lead you down a rabbit hole. So your yes could have very easily been, okay, so yeah, it did do that. What's the next question? Does it do it every time? Oh man.
And there is no gray area, right? So
no,
sometimes
it's a yes, no toggle, right?
Yeah.
There's
so
no comment section.
Like, like my favorite question, and most of them have that, for administrators, do they have MFA? Well, sure, right? We have MFA. They don't ask about the users. They said administrators. They say administrators for remote act. Yes, my RMM tool that I use is two-factored. We could check that bad boy off. So I'd like to see the cyber liability just so I know what's going on. I also try to ask for that during the sales cycle.
Do you ask for policies at all? Do you say, hey, do you have any operational, or do you ask for that?
We're starting to. I want to see the forms. To me, so on the business side, development managers, they're hopefully seeing that stuff. I want to see how the previous me filled out that form.
Yep.
Right. Because it gives me a glimpse on how they handle things.
Little historical data goes a long way in how you evaluate the move forward.
For sure. And then I also go into things like, are we doing any kind of DNS filtering? What are we using for VPN? Are we BitLockering computers? So
do you check things like MX records and those kind of things for health? Like, do you go do MX Toolbox or something and just go and see, like, do they even have SPF records set up properly?
For sure. Yeah. Once I know their domain, even during the sales cycle, you betcha. I'm putting it in there. I want to know if they have 365 so I can slant the conversation that way.
Well, and depending on what you find, I mean, you could instantly go, whoa, this is a security nightmare and you're not my client yet. Do I want to onboard something that may already be compromised?
Yep. And really talking to them. So we had a customer where I turn on all these, it's called terrorist network connection and potential breach, whatever, right? I can't think of the names.
But what it does,
it looks for logins from known bad locations. Okay. So we turn this on for one of our new customers. It's just a part of our SOP. And all of a sudden, I come in the morning and I'm greeted with 300 tickets, all because they're all over. The logins are hitting from all over the world. And I come to find out that they're using, two things are happening. One, they're using VPNs. And two, this company has a division that is legitimately in Iraq, Iran, everywhere. And like, they're physically there.
So glad you've solved that debacle.
Yeah. So, because I call her up. I'm like,
that made my heart pound a little bit.
Yeah. I go, I'm seeing people in, like, their countries I don't know how to pronounce. So I'm like, I'm spelling it. And she's like, yep.
Uzbekistan.
Yeah. They're like, is like, who are you seeing there? And I'm like, I'm giving out names. Yeah. Oh, they're there. They're there. Okay, good. Because I had a panic, right? Like, all of a sudden this one account just got totally havocked.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, that's an account that is as expressed, and I have a waiver on them saying that they don't want to do two-factor, because when they go into the office, they're not allowed to take their phone.
Right.
So the places that have two-factor, they have their phone in their car or their vehicle. They have to legit sprint out the door, approve it, hope they get it, and that's why we got them the keys.
Yeah,
right?
I was just say, we're working with a client with a similar situation, and we're trying to decide if we go to the keys or give them the It's just the number generator on their
Yep.
phone. Because most of them, they can take their phones in, but they have no
Yeah.
service. They're like in a Faraday cage when they go inside. So it's like,
Yes.
no service.
Well, so the other issue here is we're trying to see if the let's call it the vendor will allow them to stick a key into the computer, which it sounds like it's a no. So we're working on that, but it's little things like that. So you have to know about the customer, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of it's conversational. Like what is their policy? Do they even have like? So if I saw a Tor browser on somebody's machine, like what is their opinion on that? So I'm trying to help them establish, and I use one of my tools to help them write a policy if they don't have one. Because it's one thing to have a policy, it's another thing to be able to enforce said policy.
Sure. Or even if enforcement, whether it is or isn't being enforced, can you see if it's actually happening?
Yeah. Just because you say, for example, you can't browse Facebook at work, if you have no mechanism to control said object, then does it matter? So
we've hit, I think, probably 10 things that are on your highlight reel of if you've got more than 2 or 3 of these that are no's, there's probably a pretty serious conversation now that may end up in not taking them on as a client.
Or putting in some kind of, all right, here's a plan. Here's our 30, 60, 90-day plan. Within 30 days, we're going to roll out this solution to address these things, right? In 60 days, maybe we're going to work on encrypting all of the laptops so that when they're in the field, they're safe, things like that. Let's get rid of all the home machines.
Well, I think you've got to do that anyways, right? I don't care where you're at.
For sure.
As a business, when you say we're going to be more secure, it's not like a 0 to 100 miles an hour, in 3 seconds. Like there's a plan, you got a budget, there's things that aren't free that you might need to do. So talk to me a little bit as we're getting near the end here. Talk to me a little bit about when you have clients that are truly bound by regulatory requirements. We really didn't touch on that as on your list. If they're bound by regulatory requirements and they're just straight up ignoring and violating those without, essentially like the throw caution to the wind, is that a deal breaker?
It can be. It can be, because ultimately I'm the one, or whoever is in my seat is going to be on the hot seat if there was ever a breach.
Right. And if you think about healthcare, I remember very clearly, having to make those hard decisions, because if they are violating HIPAA compliance, then there's an obligation to essentially blow the whistle so that you're not part of the that gets sucked down the drain when everything gets flushed.
For sure. And whenever we talk compliance, I'm going to make sure my communication is going to be, as best as it can be.
Sure.
And I'm not going to say I'm going to waiver everything, but if I knowingly, if there are things that I know they're doing incorrectly, let's just say that they could be doing better, it's going to be documented that we recommend that we rectify that.
Sure.
Now, there may be scenarios where they won't allow us to rectify those, but as long as
you're at least creating a plan of action with milestones and dates or tentative dates based on. So this goes back to, and I think this brings it full circle. The scorecard isn't about really whether or not you do or don't take them on. It's about based on the score and their willingness as an onboarded client to improve that score to something that you consider a client you want to keep.
Yes, it's kind of like the rules for the game, right? I want to know the rules for the game before I play it. I don't want to sit down at the game and figure it out as we go. Because here's what happens. I take on a customer and I don't do any of my due diligence. And I call them up and go, oh my God, do you know people are browsing naughty sites? They are? Oh, we should probably fix that. And then the next day, hey, do you realize you have patient data on laptops that are Windows Home that are leaving the building? They are? Oh, we should fix that. And then next thing you know, I'm making 10 calls in the next 2 weeks. I want to try and get that all and have a big client meeting and be like, all right, here's the 15 things we need to address.
Well, you don't want to turn into a break fix situation when these were all things that probably should have been, the rock should have been turned over and go, okay, in the onboarding, this is that project or a series of projects as they become a client that have to get changed. And it goes back to what you said, if they're willing to change, then
Yeah.
that's potentially a great opportunity. Because I guess we have to say this over and over and over again. Every new client you bring in, if they were a perfect environment, they probably didn't need you in the first place.
For sure. For sure.
All right. Well, Charles, is there anything else that we missed that we might need to share with our audience before we wish them a goodbye?
So the big thing for me is have your checklist. You should, whatever PSA or documentation system you should have some kind of, call it a scorecard, call it whatever you want, so that it is the same information across your entire customer base. So you know what to target when there's a potential issue happen.
Got it. Well, everybody, you just heard it from what I would consider one of the best in the business at onboarding any client. Thanks and have a great week.
Thanks, everyone.